Leaders of the Word, welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, a podcast for purpose-driven healthcare leaders striving to make life better around the world by leading their teams with genuine care, servant leadership, and love. I'm Naji. In this episode, you'll be inspired by a visionary who always thought steps ahead in the pharmaceutical marketing. A leader who led people across the globe to deliver impressive results with global brands and now is the Chief Executive Officer at Brickell, Rob Brown. Before joining Brickell, Rob spent over 30 years at Eli Lilly, where he most recently served as Chief Marketing Officer and Senior Vice President of Marketing. Through his various positions in the organization, he transformed marketing capabilities to insight-based marketing, improving processes, and building a consumer marketing center of excellence. Rob also led global brands and affiliates. He led the affiliate in China, where he built the first manufacturing facility for the organization and expanded the company's reach. Rob is also passionate about education and currently serves on the board of trustees of Franklin College. And I can go on and on about Rob, but Rob, let me welcome you. I am thrilled to have you with me today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Naji, and thank you for the invitation to join you. It's quite an honor.
Rob, I'm eager to hear more about your personal story. What's in between the line of who you are today?
In some ways, a boring story, I think. In some ways, an interesting one, right? Maybe we're all too close to it. But when we think about healthcare, and I was in school, frankly, the last place I ever thought I would be is Eli Lilly and Company. And that's for a couple reasons. One is I was a football player, American football player, and I really kind of wanted to go the sports way in terms of sports leadership. And in fact, I did my internship during my MBA with the New England Patriots. So I was really looking that way. And then secondly, my dad worked at Lilly. And so the last thing I thought I'd want to do is follow my father. Actually, my mother too. She worked at Lilly for a number of years too, but my dad for a long time. So it just didn't seem like the place I was going to go. When I had the internship with the Patriots, and remember this is a long time ago now, 19 I guess it'd be 1984. So, but at that time, sports in America was not really a business. It was a family-run business. And when I spent my summer with the Patriots, I had a great summer, enjoyed it. But what I found was that there was no development strategy for a young new MBA. I went straight from undergraduate to MBA school. Some people did that at the time. With the unemployment rate at that time in double digits, it was more common than maybe today. And what I found was that unless you were an owner or married to an owner, there really wasn't a career path. And that concerned me, given I'd gone straight from undergraduate to graduate school. And so when I got back for my second year, I spent a lot of time looking for companies that were going to invest some time and energy in me and help me grow, because I realized, I had the academic capabilities, but I hadn't really learned to, lead in a business setting, and I really needed the development path. So then I started looking at companies that did that really well, and I came down to three besides the Patriots, because I still wanted to play football or beat ground football. So there was an emotional pull towards that. One was General Mills, one was 3M, and one was Lilly. And it was interesting because General Mills, I just couldn't see myself waking up every morning. I went up to meet with them and everything, and I couldn't see myself waking up every morning and talking about Lucky Charms and trying to get kids to, buy more cereal. And it was funny because as a marketer, the consumer packaged goods, that was what you were supposed to do. And I couldn't get my head into it at all. And then, so then Lilly and 3M, are kind of similar companies, both big, long successful companies that play an important role in their communities. But when I was at 3M, I asked the top guy I met with, what does it take to get ahead? And he told me time. And, for a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, went straight to MBA. Time, that was not a very good answer, And as I've matured, it was probably the most honest answer I'd ever gotten, but it was totally unacceptable to me that you wouldn't, that's hard work, success, performance. There were a whole bunch of other things that I thought ought to show up before time, and it probably was a real answer. But in all of that, then I was meeting with the Lilly folks, and again, I did it. I did the interviews more because I thought my dad would want me to at least interview there, and I could tell him I didn't like it. But everybody I met, it was about developing me and a career path that allowed me to grow and do different things. And I could do sales, and I could do marketing, and I could go to an international assignment. And it was about how do you build the best Rob? And maybe it was growing up in a family that had those values, because since my dad had been there, 40 years. But somehow that just felt right to me and the best fit, especially given my situation, I think, with coming right out of undergraduate to my MBA. So I swallowed my pride a little bit and joined the family enterprise.
Well, thanks for sharing. And well, you took it from there. Obviously, as you said, joining the family enterprise, and you led different jobs right in the organization up to being the senior VP and transforming marketing. Along the way, you've always been passionate about consumer insight, customer insight, and beyond everything, the patient at the heart of what you do and how you lead. And obviously also transferring this to the people that you always led and developed, exactly like you felt you wanted to be developed. Can you tell us a little bit, about this journey and your leadership journey?
Yeah, it's funny as you age and you reflect back, you start to see moments that probably had a bigger impact than you realized at the time. And there's probably three moments in that journey that catch my attention. First, it's the first time you got to lead people, and Lilly had done a great job at that time of allowing people to go in and out between sales and marketing. And as a district manager, my first team of 17 people at that time, again, I became a manager at 28, and the average age of my district was 42. And so here this young guy shows up, right? And so it was an interesting experience to start to learn and decide how you want to lead, right? And be conscious about it, because there was what the company told you were supposed to do. But, as a leader, you had to stop and say, well, how do I translate that into something that's going to work for this group of people? Because, they are out in the marketplace every day. They understand we've got to follow the strategy, but I've got to bring them to own that strategy, not just tell them what the strategy is. So how do you bring them along on that journey so they feel like it's theirs? That was really important. And this is the first time I'd been able to manage people that were, let's say, different than myself, between age. Almost all of them at that time were pharmacists. My last science class was like 10th grade biology. So we were definitely coming at it from two different points of view. But how did you create a team? How did you create a culture so that it felt safe for someone that, frankly, when you first showed up, they kind of looked at you and said, well, I know this guy's going to be here about 2 years. So I really don't have to listen to him. He'll probably come out and work with me 3 times, and and I'll tolerate some meetings. So how do you affect that? So that had a big impact, because it not only was the first time I got to lead a team, but everybody was virtual in essence, right? Because you weren't in the same office ever, except for a couple of days of meetings. So how do you motivate people? How do you keep them going? How do you keep them on strategy? So that had a big impact on how I spent a lot of time thinking about that during that assignment, which I really appreciated, because I knew I didn't want to be a long-term sales guy, but I wanted to get as much of the leadership learnings as I could out of that situation, because I thought it was really helpful. The job just before that, they actually had me in Lilly, was an HR job, and I became the regional HR person. And that was interesting, because I left Indianapolis to go to the East Coast as the regional HR recruiter, basically. And I must say that was probably one of the more humbling moments in my life, because when you're an associate at Lilly, you're all kind of vying to become a manager, And that's the big step. And so they were adding a sales force. So they're adding a bunch of managers, and they called me and they said, hey, the head of HR would like to talk to you. And I went in and he said, hey, we'd like to offer you this lateral move to New York City. For a year, I basically interviewed probably 1,000 people. And I got to learn how to interview people, but also I watched and helped district managers who did a terrible job firing and hiring people, and others that did a really good job. And I got to see and learn what good looked like before I actually had to do it. But that whole experience, that sales, whether it be the HR or the district manager, really set me up well, because then when I moved to China, which was 4 or 5 years later, we had at that time 20 employees in 3 hotel rooms in 3 different cities. And we're starting the Chinese affiliate. So we were building from the ground up, and knowing how to hire, even if it was Chinese employees versus, American employees, and understanding a culture you're trying to create was a fascinating experience, because there was nothing, right? There was no Lilly culture. There were no Lilly sales. There were a few Lilly people. But you had to start from scratch, and all the employees at that time were basically coming from. A lot of them were coming from state-run enterprises. So the big communist companies that didn't care at all about customers or care all about employees, frankly. And then you had other ones that had worked already in a short period of time for 5 pharmaceutical companies. So they were kind of your hired guns, if you will, but had no loyalty to Lilly, and didn't care what our culture was. They were creating their culture because that's what they did. And then they moved on to the next place. So that early experience in sales and HR really paid off. And I always laughed when I was reflecting in China that I was mad having to move for a lateral position and not getting promoted, a little embarrassed because the other associates were getting promoted, but incredibly grateful that someone had the vision that for me as a fast moving young person, I needed that experience to be better in the future, even if I didn't know I needed that experience to be better in the future. And that was really interesting for me to see. But boy, when I got to China, I'd reflect back and thank God I did that HR thing, because it saved me a lot of times in that situation.
On this, your experience in China and then as a DSM, you talked about powerful things, right? Like, and many might be experienced that you started with impatience, right? Like people telling you early on your career about like it's gonna take time. And then you shared about leading people from different expertise, being 28, having people in 42, and then China, a totally different culture, and building everything practically from scratch, right? Like as you've done there. I'd like both sides, right? Like the challenges that you faced. Any story about what was your biggest mistake that you learned from either as a DSM or in China? And then what is your learning, to give people that are experiencing some of those today?
Yeah, it's funny because I sometimes do a presentation that when I was at Lilly, I was doing it near the end of my career, the 4 times I should have been fired. And it's a reflection back on making mistakes. And I do that. I used to do that presentation, especially at Lilly, because there's a bit of sometimes a culture that you can't make a mistake, and that, oh, you got that far ahead, you must have done everything right. And, and I'm kind of the antithesis of that, because I kind of go into things and we try to do the best we can. But if you're going to jump into situations that you don't have expertise in, right, but you want to figure out, like China, I'd never been to China before, I didn't speak Chinese, you're going to make mistakes. And so you've got to be willing to acknowledge those, learn from those, and move forward. A simple one that I like to tell, because it gets back to ties them both together, is we had been in country about 6 months, and we had probably, at that point, maybe 20 sales reps. And I said to the team, I said, why don't we bring in the top 5 or 6 sales reps and have them tell us what they're doing and then what they need. And let's see if we can expand that to other people and get going a little bit on our performance here. And we did that. And they came in, I think there were 6 of them, and they broke into teams of 2. And we said, hey, go away and come back and tell us what are the 3 things that would help you be more successful. that the company could help you be more successful. So the first team came back and they were talking about everything. And their top thing was, we need Rob to come to our district. Interesting, for our territory. And so I kind of said, okay, that's interesting. I understand, but that's your job, and I've got my job, and you got to do your job. And and then the second one came up, and that was in their top three. And the third one came up, and it was in their top three. And the mistake I made, it's a classic, is I was applying an American value system into a Chinese situation, and I got mad about it a little bit. And I kind of lectured them a little bit on, hey, look, you know what, we've hired you to do this job. I understand that I may be able to come in and do it easier, help you quite a bit, but I can't go to 10,000 hospitals in China. That's not going to work. So you've got to make this happen and everything. And I kind of stormed out and thought, what an utter waste of time. But it cost us a year, because, when people tell you something and your first reaction is, boy, that's stupid. Too often we think, wow, they're not very smart. And instead, what I should have been saying is, what don't I understand? And what it allows me to do is stop now. And whenever I get in those situations, I pause and I think, am I missing something here? And make sure asking more questions before I conclude that the person just doesn't know what they're talking about. And it's interesting. It took that China experience, but we lost a year of progress in China just because I didn't listen very well and didn't try to understand what someone was really saying to us.
Yeah, that's definitely a powerful, learning. How many times, like with different cultures, with listening, as you said, like we just passed through small signals, people, they give it to us and we just don't take it, right?
Well, you're right. And, it's funny because sometimes I'll say to people, what's an important learn? Listen. Well, duh. But it's very easy to think you're listening. And then there's really listening. And frankly, this applies to our children too, maybe our spouse as well, right? Are we really there, mentally there, and fully engaged and understanding? And it also translates to our customers, Najee. You're asking me about deep customer insights. And some of it starts with this, really stopping and saying, what is the real need here? What is the understanding? And trying to really see it from their shoes and translate it back. Too often we know what product we have and what our thing does, and we want to push that upon them rather than stop and understand what the real unmet need is and build backwards from that. And hopefully when you do that and you have an asset, you'll find an intersection between a group of customers that really have that need and not find it necessary to try to get everybody to use your product, which would be the other frame of that.
And Rob, moving from a large company as you described to now leading as CEO of Biotech, what are the learnings that you took from big corporations, brought them here, and what is your overall experience? I'd say
I think people take for granted what they're learning and the quality of the people around them and the understanding and the depth of expertise that we've been able to build over a series of years. And it kind of comes full circle back to the New England Patriots, right? Because they didn't have that, and that's what scared me away. And I've come back now that I have that 30 plus years later. I'm putting myself in the same type of situation, just in a biotech setting. But the understanding of the business, the understanding of a marketplace, very much like China. I'm starting a culture. How do I want to build this company? What culture is it going to have? How do we be inclusive? How do we attract the best people, even though we may not be the most attractive company at this moment for them to join? Those things are consistent and common and are very transferable. Obviously, you're doing it with substantially less resources. So learning how to do things and using judgment sometimes rather than data, trusting the fact that you've done this many times and you don't need all the data to make the decision. That has never been a real problem for me, but I don't have a choice at this stage either. So it's a little bit like not having, not being on the wire without the net underneath you. But it's been a lot of fun to see how you take these these experiences and learnings we've had over those years, and apply them into this smaller startup setting. As a CEO, there's a whole different set of skills. I spent a lot of my time with investors, as well as analysts and that type of customer, rather than focusing on patients and doctors. But in some ways they have the same types of needs, right? Understanding what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do, and finding that right marriage, and being able to help them understand you by listening well. All of that still applies.
Yeah, and you talked about, we discussed a little bit last time offline about leading through crisis, obviously beyond the pandemic, right?
Yes.
Being in a startup, I imagine, and in a biotech, is kind of potentially every day might become suddenly a crisis, right? And how you want to manage this, from resources, as you said, funding to even patient safety. Like you manage a broad spectrum with, as you said, kind of tight group of people. How do you do this? How do you keep your people engaged through those moments of ups and downs that you go through, and the resilience that obviously you built with your team? How have you managed this?
A good example of one of those that I'll talk about how we managed it was right after we went public. We went public through a reverse merger, and that basically means that we merged with another company that was already public. But we were the majority, even though we were the private company. So you take their NASDAQ ticker, you take their cash, they get a part of your company. And so that's how you go public. And it's a faster way than the IPO approach. But every process has its own pluses and minuses. The downside of this one is you don't get that roadshow you do with an IPO. You build a lot of knowledge and learning about your company. And it's not that all those people necessarily invest in the IPO, but they may invest once you become public. And so you're building basically demand for your shares and for your company. When you do the reverse merger, you don't do that. We spent most of our time up to the merger convincing the current shareholders of the company to vote yes. And so that was spent. And so once you become public, you got to flip it and go out and go see customers. Well, we unfortunately, about 4 weeks into the being public, we were sued by the inventor of our lead asset. And that lawsuit meant we couldn't go out and talk to anybody. One of the people that invested in us right when we launched, they agreed to put in $25 million at the reverse merger. They backed out. So now all of a sudden we've become public, reverse merger. We don't have the money to do the phase 3s that we did, the reason for the merger, because of a lawsuit. And I can't go out and talk to anybody. And that was, as you might imagine, a very difficult time. We were able to work through the lawsuit in about 3 months. I think the inventor realized that he was doing more damage than benefit. We knew that if we think we were in the right, but the lawsuit, it would have taken 2 years to be settled, and we had about 6 months of cash. So if it took more than 6 months, we were dead anyway. So we settled in about 3 months. We paid them a little more, even though that was the best decision for the company, even though frankly it hurt, right? Because it wasn't something that we thought we needed to do, but it was what it was. So how do you lead your employees through all that? So, we're like 14 people. We're virtual before the pandemic, in that people are located in 4 or 5 locations around the United States. Most of them, this is their first startup, right? So they've come from other things, but they've never been involved this early. What I would tell you is, as a leader, and this is true whether it was in China when we had difficulties or Cialis when we were fighting Viagra, this is a team that is all engaged and really understands what is going on is very powerful. So brutal honesty, but with optimism, but real optimism. You can't spin it. These are people's lives, right? If we don't have money, some of these folks are going to not have a job, and therefore, and may not find a job for a while, and that can affect their family, et cetera. So you need to be honest and transparent with them along the way. And you can be optimistic about, hey, here's what we're trying to do, and here's why we feel good about it. But you need to be realistic too. And people can tell are you being authentic as a leader or not? And it was really important that we let everybody go on that journey. So we literally had every 2-week calls, Zoom calls, where we would give everybody an update and then answer any questions anybody had. And of course, we did that on the side too, if people weren't comfortable talking in person. Out of those 14 people, we lost one through that period of time, which I thought was pretty good. Now, the journey of a biotech, we actually settled that lawsuit 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. So we went from one crisis to the next crisis. But we were able to manage through that. It's an interesting thing because it also, a lot of these things, how well that goes is dependent on the culture you've created, the trust you've created, but also how well you've hired. And it's funny, back to that old HR job, I put a high value when I hire people on grit, because things aren't going to go right. Every product I've ever launched has died at least twice. And to find a way but if you make it through that, this can be still very, very successful. But some people kind of aren't ready to do that, right? And so what is your team made up of? Who do you hire? How do you bring them in? And then how do you create a culture that allows them to utilize their creative problem solving for the good of the purpose? But when I'm looking at teams, and I know I have a really successful team, and I know the people and the members have grit, and I also know that they put the objective of the team ahead of their personal objectives. And that's when I know a team is really functioning. And if I ever see somebody who we're interviewing who feels like they're a me first, we won't hire them, because it will inevitably come back to haunt us. We had a doctor who was coming out for an interview kind of in the middle of all this, and he was complaining because we didn't have a policy of letting him fly first class. It's like, we're running out of money. And it was the craziest thing that he would bring this up to somebody. He brought it up to the my administrative assistant who was booking the travel. He didn't bring it up to me. But of course, I asked these questions because AAs can tell you a lot what's going on. And she said, yeah, he was complaining because, his current job, they pay first class. I was like, that's not who we need in a small biotech. Even if he has the right science depth of background, it's not going to work. So, can you find those employees with grit, and then can you get everybody to be all in for a purpose where they'll put that ahead of personal advancement and those type of things, because they want to see the team succeed. When you do that, man, you've got a winning combination, and that is molded in moments like our fight and raising money, and like in China when you're struggling to build a business. But if you can do it, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. You gave the beautiful recipes that are not easy to cook, right? But building high performing teams. And I loved your sentence. You said brutal honesty with real optimism. That's leadership.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, right? Because we all hear people that you kind of don't believe them because everything's always good or spin. You've got to have that right balance. Give people hope. And if there is no hope, there is no hope. But there's almost always 3 or 4 options. And you're trying to, in a biotech like we are, a small cap biotech, we're always kind of balancing 2 or 3 balls. And people say, well, are we going to do this? And I said, well, I don't know. It depends. To do that, we're going to need to, find this amount of money or this. That is our preferred approach, but it may not be what we do, because there may be something else that comes up. So how nimble are you? How nimble is your organization? And then can you really act on this as you find out that information and move?
Great, Rob, I will move to a different section now, where I will give you one word, and I want you to give me top of mind what the first reflection that you will have. Okay?
Sure.
So the first one is leadership.
First of mine, bullshit. And what I mean by that is, I think sometimes, obviously leadership is really, really important, but sometimes it becomes almost a soundbite, right? And rather than true leadership, and how do you lead teams at that emotional, inherent human level? And too often leadership books, I think, you can read the first 30 pages and this repeats itself all the time. But I don't know. I think this is more about how do you create a community of humans working together for a cause, and the leader's job is to, in essence, pave the road and get out of the way. Now, is that leadership? I think that is leadership, but too often, the leadership, I don't know, the buzzwords around leadership sometimes drive me a little crazy.
Love that. I can tell you, it's the first time I will ever, and the last time potentially I will never get this first reaction to it. But I love how you frame it.
You said first word. You said first thought. You got first thought.
What about marketing?
Human. In my mind, marketing is all about the study of understanding humans.
And this one I have to ask you this, even if it might look like an advertisement, but Disney, yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know if there's one word. I guess customer, or it would be the one that comes to mind first. I think Disney, certainly the Disney parks and their approach to how they how they think about that experience someone's going to have, I think is exceptional. I don't know if all of Disney has that same frame. Like, is Disney Plus framed that way? Have they translated that human experience on the park and thinking about that holistically to the other things they do? Can you? It's certainly harder in a virtual world. But Disney still today is so many things, ESPN, all these other things. But Disney's parks, certainly, I think they have been exceptional at creating these memorable experiences. And probably the marketing lesson they teach you the most, in my mind, is not everything has to be great, but the things your customers care about most have to be great. Everything else just needs to be okay. Now, it can't be terrible, right? Because if you go have food and there's worms in it, that's going to cause everything else to be a bad experience, right? But if the food doesn't, you don't go to Disney for a 5-star meal, and so, or at least certainly Disney World, you don't go. Maybe Epcot, but that's not the experience. But it needs to be healthy, clean, good, warm, all those kind of things. But it doesn't have to be great. Other experiences are what's going to make the experience exceptional for somebody.
Yeah, and I always remember, like, well, obviously you took us through those experiences, and you always came back with this and translated it into also biotech, pharma words, right? What are the two things that you need to be exceptionally good at, and the others you just need to be okay? But like, I always remember you saying this, which is so true. Like, the focus on key things that matters for patients and customers most.
No, it is right, because if you try to do everything exceptionally well, first off, you can't afford it, and secondly, there's no organization that's great at everything, right? It's impossible, and it can be some of the challenges of a company like Lilly. Does the accounting department say we want to be the best accounting department in the world? I don't know. I think what you don't want to go to jail. You want your accounting to be done right. But I don't think it has to be exceptionally good, right? But if every department tries to be exceptional, it just scatters your cash too widely to actually be exceptional at anything. And then you just create an average experience across the board.
Yeah. What about spread love in organizations?
Yeah, I love the concept of it, and in my mind, that comes back to this kind of the servant leadership approach, and certainly that's kind of the way I've always kind of viewed my job as a leader. Hire good people who are smarter than yourself, and help them navigate through challenges to allow them to succeed and flourish. And I think when you do that, and you treat people in a way that they know that you're in it for them and the whole group, you create a culture of love and trust, right? One of the interesting things is when I went to China the first time, I sat down with some networks we had, and it was interesting. The first people I met with over dinner, this gentleman said to me, "Look, it's really important that you not trust your employees." He said they will take advantage of you. They will steal from you. You need to be brutal and you need to check on everything. Limit how much money they can spend. You have to approve everything. Otherwise, they will steal you blind. And I left there, and this was a long-term China expert and someone the company had hooked me up with to get to know. And I left dinner and I kind of thought, I just reject that. I don't know anything about the Chinese people, but I know they're human beings. And my guess is, that I'd been in the country maybe 2 days at this point. My guess is that if I treat them with respect and I give them the platitude to do their job and treat them that way, they will flourish. And yes, a few of them will cheat me. Who cares? Who cares, right? What matters is the other hundreds will be motivated and passionate. The average turnover in China was 35% for 3 years. The 3 years I was there. Our last year and the following 2 years, our turnover rate was 5%. Wow. 1/7. Why is that? Because we created this culture. We looked at each individual in China and said, how do we make you a better person holistically? So we set up the Lilly China Institute, where every employee got 2 weeks of training, from the receptionist to the sales rep to the financial head. 1 week was about your job, and 1 week was about you as an individual. And by doing that, we were investing in our employees and making them better. And because of that, they were incredibly loyal to us in an environment that there was very little loyalty. We stole that idea from Motorola, who was doing that. And we thought that was really interesting. It allowed us to go, we were late going into China. So when I got there, most companies had been there 10 years. We had not. But by the time I left, we were the 8th largest international company, even though we had just been there 4 years, because we were able to build and create this thing. And it made a big difference in how people approached their job, because for the first time for them, they felt like they were a part of something bigger, and that their voice really mattered, and that they could really flourish as an individual.
It always starts with people, as you said, like building a community of humans to the bigger purpose. Any final word of wisdom, Rob, for all the leaders and executives listening to you today?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. There's the interesting paradox of leadership is that if you are able to put your team and others first, and the cause first, right, and get your team to do that, the paradox is you will end up being much more successful. It's the people that focus on their own success that they may get ahead quicker in the short term, but they'll ultimately fail because people will see that for what it is. So learning, and it's a maturity thing, frankly, because whenever you're in a leadership position and something goes wrong and you're new in a leadership position, your first reaction is, oh my God, what does that mean for me? But the question is, what do you do? Is your behavior that you go and try to protect yourself, or do you dive in and try to help solve the problem and help your team work through it so that they come out of it well? And when you do that, and if you can teach yourself that is the way you solve challenges and problems, the paradox is you will ultimately be more successful, even though it may seem counterintuitive in that moment in time.
Thank you so much, Rob, for your time, for this genuine and inspiring discussion, and for being with me today.
Great to see you, Nanji. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you all for tuning in. Connect with us on SpreadLoveIO.com. Subscribe to your favorite podcast app so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Stay in touch, and please share with us your thoughts and reviews. And most importantly, spread love in your organizations.